Hi, Satya.
Hi, Stephanie. Thank you so much for doing this, and it's great to be with you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Given Microsoft's crucial role in the workplace and the fact that you talk to CEOs every day, what will the future workplace be like based on our lessons from the last 10 months?
Yeah, it's been, Stephanie, the most unprecedented at-scale experiment of trying to sustain productivity and economic activity in spite of what have been severe constraints. But when I think about just the nature of work, the one thing I would say is coming out of this, we're going to talk more about flexibility, because that will be the expectation. Where you work, what times you work, and from where do you work. All of these things, people's expectations across industries and functions is going to change. And so all of us as business leaders will need to accommodate for that. So in that context, I would say there are three at least dimensions, Stephanie, I think about where we're getting good data. For example, on collaboration. One of the most interesting things in this crisis has been how people have been able to transcend space. In other words, first-line people on the manufacturing floor in healthcare who are able to call into expertise that is remote, working from home, and yet be in the front lines, super productive, and their expertise being tapped. You see this in manufacturing, in Packard's plants in Ohio. As they're bringing on new employees, people remotely are able to train them. They're able to use these HoloLens devices for self-guiding learning. So that's the type of stuff. In fact, I had one of the most wonderful visits to an NHS hospital in the UK where the doctor took me. I was on a Teams call. He was wearing a HoloLens, went into a COVID ward, and all the other remote doctors, because they wanted to minimize the surface area for the number of people who were in the COVID ward. So you're seeing tremendous innovation in how people are overcoming, at least not being co-present, but yet all the expertise being there where it needs to be there. So that's sort of one trend. The other thing is, of course, we're all in online meetings, collaborating, meeting. But the bottom line is, meetings is not the only place where work happens, right? Work happens before, after. You need to have synchronous and asynchronous communications. So even when we built Teams, that was the idea, which is let's have a tool, especially when people are going to be more in hybrid, flexible work. It's not just about all of us are all the time in online meetings, but we have a tool that allows us to work flexibly and communicate, collaborate for both asynchronously and synchronously. So collaboration is going to be one major change. And another one is learning, right? We talk about all these systems for engagement or systems of record, but I think systems of learning are going to be super important. After all, corporations are ultimately about knowledge turns. How are we learning from each other as employees? How are we learning from customers? And in this remote everything world, learning and thinking about learning being incorporated into your workflow tools or your day-to-day work tools is going to become even more important. And last thing I would mention is well-being, Stephanie. If anything, all of us have learned that you can't define productivity narrowly. In fact, we should never have done that. But clearly in this crisis, I think all of us have learned, for example, even good management, right? We have a management framework of model, coach, care, which I love a lot. But that last element of care has become the premium thing, which is having a single manager who cares about their people, has that empathy, connects, uses all the tools. But the tools are tools. It's just ultimately the human connection that is needed. And then also data to help inform, right? How do you take transition time? How do you take time to recharge versus your work days? As somebody described it, sometimes remote work could feel like I'm sleeping at work. And how do you really ensure that you really have the time to recharge? So those are some of the structural changes that I see coming out of it.
The other thing that has come out of the pandemic is a realization that there are a lot of frailties in the business and in the economy, whether it's supply chain or companies' ability to do things like close their books quarterly in a remote way. What are the structures and structural changes that businesses are going to need to embrace in order to accommodate a world in which these sort of black swan events actually become commonplace?
Yeah, that's a great question, Stephanie. I mean, the reality is, this was a pandemic as the tail event, to your point, the black swan event. The next one, we don't know what it will be. But I think one thing that we will come out of this particular black swan event is with a better appreciation for what are the set of resources that help us both create that business continuity as well as that ability to pivot and transform because of any structural change that happens. And to me, I shudder to think, Stephanie, if it was not for this generation of digital technology, what would the world's economic activity would have been? Like, remote education or health. You see it, right? Retail, the ability even for the smallest of retailers to pivot and have curbside pickup is possible today. And you see that everywhere, right? That's one way for people to sustain. Healthcare, I think none of us, we've been talking about telemedicine forever, except none of us going forward will ever not start with an AI triage tool on your phone. That then leads to a telemedicine visit. And then only will you show up at an outpatient ward. So I think healthcare permanently will be changed. Manufacturing, it's pretty amazing to see how these digital twins are enabling people to do complete lights out manufacturing even. So I think digital technology is going to be key for both resilience. In every board now, they talk about digital technology, not just for sort of transformation, but resilience. And that even the agenda on transformation is going through a qualitative change where it's about that agility with which and the quickness with which you can move is becoming much more of a premium thing, right? It's not good for you to have a project that takes 10 months to change something in a core business process when in order to survive, you have to absolutely pivot right away. And so those are some of the big qualitative shifts that we are seeing.
Yeah. We have a question from someone from our Envision audience. The question is, as leaders are paving the way toward a more ethical digital future, how have your organizations or how has Microsoft tried to ensure that it's an equal opportunity across all geographies?
Yeah, it's a great question. To me, I feel that one of the things that we as a technology company have always been grounded on is how do we, our participation in any community or in any country, how is it ultimately benefiting that community and country? You have to be able to answer, especially as a multinational company. I feel like our license to operate comes from our ability to go to any community and say, here is how what we do is helping that community, small businesses become more productive. Their large businesses employ more people and become globally more competitive. Or the public sector institutions in that community become more efficient. Health outcomes, education outcomes. That's at the core. And when you do that broadly, then you can say, look, it's not just about what is our success. It's ultimately going to be driven by success you're driving around you. That, I think, is the social contract. Quite frankly, every corporation is going to need in order to be a good citizen, and in fact, an accepted citizen of any community in any country. The one piece that I would say, Stephanie, coming out of this very specifically pandemic, we talk a lot about technology and the big AI, but one of the biggest shifts I'm seeing is for the first time, we now have the power of some of these tools in the hands of what I'll call domain experts, right? At T-Mobile, when sort of people who are the retail specialists were able to take some of these power applications and build the tools required in order for their stores to continue to operate, that is in some sense creating more productivity for T-Mobile, but is also empowering the first-line retail specialists to have digital skills, digital productivity. Well, that to me is one of the market change, hopefully, that's going to come out of it, right? So it doesn't become that everything around digital is just for the knowledge workers, but it does transcend and span into all of the domain experts, frontline and otherwise.
The theme of this episode of Envision is centered around purpose. And more than a year ago, you and Microsoft signed on to the Business Roundtable's revised statement of purpose, acknowledging that the purpose of a corporation is to serve a community of stakeholders, not just shareholders. Can you just talk in our very brief time remaining about the practical ways that Microsoft has embraced this notion of stakeholder capitalism?
Yeah, it's for sure the topic of our times. Obviously, the Business Roundtable's definition and commitment is something that we've signed on to. One of the best definitions I've seen is from Colin Mayer, who is an economist out of Oxford, who talks about the purpose of a corporation is to create profitable solutions to the challenges of people and planet. And the key word being profitable solutions, but the other key phrase being challenges of people and planet. And so to me, if we can all commit ourselves to in the core of our business model, right? One of the things that I always think about is it's not about, okay, I'm doing my business here and ESG somewhere else. That's just not. You have to have, ESG is a very good thing, but you can't have your own core business model itself not be aligned with the success of the world. So that's kind of, to my earlier comments about Microsoft's success has to be fundamentally built on success all around us, right? So that equitable economic growth in every community, in every country. But then we have to even go beyond that, Stephanie, to your point, which is we got to say, okay, how is that growth happening, right? Is it, for example, aligned with the one finite resource we have, which is the planet? In our case, are our data centers moving to become, where we are using only clean energy for all of it? In fact, we have made commitments about our own we want to get to carbon negative by 2030. So how are we going to get there, measure that? So I think being in any business, you have to look and say, okay, how are you aligned with that finite resource in the planet? As a technology company and a platform company, we even have to take responsibility for trust in technology, whether it be security, privacy, AI ethics, internet safety. So trust in technology is another area where we have to invest in, right? You can't say we'll worry about trust in technology after we are successful in our core business. It has to be very much part of our core business. Same thing with even the institutions all of us depend on. So like, for example, around democracies, how are we going to have technology help in, strengthen the democratic institutions that all of us depend on? And so to me, those are the key things that one does. And that's what is grounding Microsoft, not only aligning our core business model to creating surplus and creating value all around us in every community, but also making sure that we're investing in trust in technology, as well as doing things that are aligned with the planet, and ensuring that the fundamental rights of people are being protected. Those are the things that we are very, very focused on.
Well, the world is watching, and Microsoft always sort of sets the trends here. So, Satya, thank you so much for your time today. We're really grateful to you for sharing your insights.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Thanks for the opportunity.